Hi everybody, Dana Litwin here again, and welcome back to Tuesday Tips for Leaders of Volunteers. This week talking about community building, and I've touched on this in a few other interviews and Tuesday Tips before, but really wanted to focus on a few quick tips for community building towards a common initiative or a new program launch, or just wanting to connect with other agencies, whether those are governments or nonprofits, in your area of interest, your community of practice, and also just to have good communication and sharing of resources, again, towards a common goal or a common interest, even if your specific mission and causes are not the same. So a really good example of this is hospitals thinking about social determinants of health and working with food banks and other social services, community services, housing issues to help impact the quality of life for their patients. And that is one kind of example of how kind of cross-sector community building can occur. The more common community building is really just reaching out to other agencies that maybe do similar work or complementary work to your cause and your mission, and creating those relationships. Well, how do you most effectively create those relationships? That takes a sense of trust, transparency of communication, and genuine interest and outreach. It works a lot better to invite people to have an honest conversation, have a listening session or open feedback session, either between leaders of these organizations and or open it up to the larger community. If you're, again, launching new programs that are going to impact the community, getting community feedback on that with open meetings and fun listening sessions. One of the questions that came up talking recently on The Nonprofit Enthusiast with Lashina Williams, it was a great conversation that dives deeper into community building, and I'll link to that archived session below that you can watch. But one of the things that came up that she asked, which is a great question, is how do you know that your organization or agency is ready to host a listening session or has the capacity to do specific outreach aiming at collaboration and cooperation with other agencies? And my answer is, well, almost any agency at this point in time feels fairly overwhelmed and like they don't have the resources to do this. But typically, if you're a one-person band and there's one executive director trying to do everything and scrambling, probably not the best agency to host, but you can at least invite people into a conversation. I've also found that sometimes very, very large regional or national well-established organizations, they sometimes their leadership can be too disconnected from the day-to-day happenings to initiate it. So it turns into a little bit of a Goldilocks type of situation where usually a medium-sized, fairly well-resourced, fairly effective agency that they have good community engagement, volunteer engagement, someone that's maybe certified in service enterprise, which is evaluation and certification and learning process that's now sponsored by Alive, Association of Leaders in Volunteer Engagement, and I'll link to that. So if a medium-sized organization typically is pretty good to host or help organize and launch these community listening sessions. And if you want more information on hosting listening sessions, I've got some other videos where I've mentioned that before, and I'll link to those with cards and at the end of this one. But really thinking about a community building effort is about trust, transparency, the sense that we are in this together toward a shared goal initiative. And really it's up to maybe the leader of volunteers or director of development or whatever your role is, typically middle management, but sometimes hopefully around the leadership team. It's really up to us to help educate and manage up to executive leadership to understand that cooperation and collaboration are much, much more effective these days than trying to be in competition with each other. Competition for community program participants, competition for volunteers, competition for donors. We need to leave those kind of obsolete competitive, extractive, exploitive ideas behind, and really realize that we have to come together collaboratively, cooperatively, collectively to solve the problems that are happening in our communities every day. It's not the role of nonprofits to solve all of society's ills. Hopefully some government agencies can step into that role with larger infrastructure, but if there's a specific issue, or again, it can be positive, a new initiative or rollout or something, you want to get the word out, having listening sessions and doing that very authentic, sincere, organic community building is really key. One of the things that works best is, especially if you're reaching out to new audiences or you want to get to part of the community or a neighborhood that speaks a different language, has a different cultural background, it really works best if you already have some staff or volunteers that speak that language or from that background, because people naturally trust someone that they know or that they know shares their culture and especially their language. If you do not yet have anyone in your organization who's, and I'll use an example, I worked with an organization that wanted to do specific outreach to the Vietnamese community here in Northern California. We didn't have anyone who spoke Vietnamese in our volunteers or staff or board members, but we worked closely with a Vietnamese community center, with libraries in that specific neighborhood of, in this case, San Jose, and also media companies that worked in that language and did online or print or radio things in Vietnamese, did shows in language, and again, created those relationships first and built up that trust first, and then had those community centers specifically host so that people could feel comfortable speaking their native languages and still have enough translators and people there that they trusted to start a conversation with a group of people they didn't know yet. And that really led to some very successful outcomes. And listening sessions also can include information that's hard to hear or challenging or surprising, and that's the most important part. That's the most important piece of community feedback or listening sessions, is getting some inconvenient truths or hard truths and seeing how an agency or a program can adjust to address those. And it's also important to, again, in the Goldilocks zone of finding something that's just right, finding that balance where you can't please everybody all the time, but you can communicate your mission, your message, your cause of your organization in a way that resonates with people and also helps others self-select that that's just not their priority, that's not what they're interested in, and that's okay. So spend time cultivating these real relationships for community building. And for a deeper dive, about a half hour or so interview, check out my conversation with Lashina Williams of the Nonprofit Enthusiasts below. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you next time. Take care.